Anthony Moss is with me today, and he is a renowned strategy and governance specialist with over 30 years' experience advising more than 180 medium to large private companies globally. He brings a unique perspective shaped by CEO and director roles across the UK, Europe, the US, and Australia. As a passionate advocate and experienced chair of advisory boards, Anthony's insights have helped countless businesses unlock sustainable growth and sharpen their decision making. He is the author of The CEO Game Changer, a practical guide for business leaders on building and leveraging advisory boards to transform their organizations. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Julie, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your fabulous podcast.
It's a pleasure. I absolutely love that you have written this book, and because I totally have seen and been part of an advisory board and know the difference that it makes. So I'm really excited to jump into this.
Yeah, great.
So what inspired you to write The CEO Game Changer, and what gap were you hoping to fill?
Yeah, well, I guess it's you talked about my corporate career, so I've had the great opportunity to be a four-time CEO, twice of my own business and two with different businesses. One where I got the opportunity to run a business from a complete startup in the US. From ground zero and build a business that kind of ended up with 50 odd in the US and about 180 in the Dominican Republic, kind of working for me. And then after moving to Australia and doing another couple of CEO roles, joining a consulting firm, being CEO of that consulting firm for a number of years, and then deciding to go out on my own and do my own consulting, working with CEOs of high growth privately owned companies. I've just seen and experienced firsthand, the challenge that CEOs of private companies have, and they're kind of unique because they are typically, people with a great ambition, who are trying to make their own dent in the universe, and by their very nature, by being kind of small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have the resources or what I call a fully qualified management team, meaning they very often have great, really skilled kind of domain experts within their kind of business, but who don't have necessarily broad commercial experience. And that just means that the pressure on the CEO is to kind of figure it out themselves. And CEOs are what I call commercially lonely, which means that they are the fountain of kind of inspiration for their team and motivation. And even if they've got a great team, or even if they've got a board or fellow shareholders, bottom line is everybody wants to know the CEO's got the answers
Yeah.
all the time. And the reality is CEOs are only human. So, there are those times when we have wicked problems, or we have problems that, really you could flip a coin in terms of how you make a decision. And it's in those times that the structure of an advisory board can be really advantageous. So, and then in my consulting career, having built a number of advisory boards, chaired a number of advisory boards, I've just seen firsthand, as you described, the value that they can bring. So I guess, but having said that, it's really not common knowledge that there is this structure out there, and it's not common knowledge that it's actually relatively easy to set up, but that the transformational impact can be huge. And so what I set out to do with this book, I guess, was to really set out that kind of explanation of what the transformational impact will be. That's why I call it the game changer, because I think it is a game changer. And then in the kind of second half of the book, it's kind of a bit of a how-to, which is this is how you do it. These are the steps. As you can see, it's kind of not rocket science, and more CEOs, in my view, should explore doing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And like you said, it's really lonely at the top.
Yeah,
And you might not have the people within your business who will help you get to that next stage, but they still might be right for your business. So bringing in people who can help you with that growth is so important.
yeah.
Yeah. So you highlight 4 stages in business within your book. So could you walk through these stages and share at which point should a CEO consider getting an advisory board together?
Yeah, look, having built several businesses and consulted to lots of businesses that have been growing, the stages are common. It's always the same kind of issues. It's people, cash, product, market fit, market share. How do we gain those? That real kind of value proposition that differentiates you in the marketplace. And I guess I distill that into these 4 stages that it's pretty easy to kind of identify where organizations are. And the first stage is probably those first 3 years, which are early stage, which are great fun. It was kind of like my experience setting that business up in the States. Even though it wasn't my business, it felt like my business. So, you're working 24/7. Every new client is 100% more than you had before. And you get those new orders and you get the validation for your product. So you understand you got some market fit, but really, you're out there kind of fighting to determine that there is a business here. And then I talk about the stage that is probably the longest stage that businesses stay in, which is what I call the fighting for position stage. So you're past that early stage. You've got a customer franchise. You've got customers that like you, that recommend you, that continue to buy from you. Um, but your performance is at haphazard. You're probably going through that change of leadership from those kind of people that help you sort of set it up, but perhaps don't have the skills for where you're going. And you bounce from this growth period to cash flow challenges to trying to break into that next level of kind of reputation and scale in the marketplace. And a lot of businesses at that point kind of do this kind of boom and bust
Yeah.
spiral. And it's tough to get out of that spiral. In my view, the way to get out of that spiral is actually really getting crystal clear on the strategy. The North Star that you're trying to achieve, the resources that you've got, all of those things. And then if you can do that, you get into what I call the transformation stage. And I guess it's at that point between the fighting for position and transformation stage that I think is the real value of an advisory board. And the transformation stage is, still challenging and you're still growing, but it's really clear where you're going. It's clear the capability that you need to put into the business. It's clear the positioning that you've got in the marketplace, and you've just kind of got to put the pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
And an advisory board in that stage can kind of provide that step change where you can shift from having kind of limited resources, limited skills to accessing those resources and skills kind of on a fractional basis through your advisory board, which really gives you that stepping stone into what I call the fourth stage, which is the industry leadership stage.
Yeah.
And when I mean industry leadership, I'm not talking about building a business the size of Atlassian or BHP or if that's your goal, great, that's fantastic. But I'm talking about being known for something in the marketplace. So when people think of a particular product or service, you're front of mind. You might be still one of many, but you're front of mind. You've got kind of ownership, and other businesses in your industry are looking to you and saying, "How are they doing that? Geez, we'd love to be like them." That's the kind of industry leadership position. So I think the advisory
Absolutely.
board comes in that, when you've been through the cycle of fighting for position a few times, then you kind of go, hang on a second, something's got to change because we're doing this roller coaster. Um, Shifting then into the transition phase, that's a point when an advisory board can give you that effect that I call the unleash effect.
Yes, I love that. And you're so right. Like that influence is exactly what you want as a business, like to be top of mind, to be known for something, as you say, which is so important. And other people are thinking, how did they do that?
Yes,
So
yeah, that's right.
is
Then you've got a position, you've got a market.
yeah, yes, absolutely. And I know you write about this in the book, but can you share an example of where you've seen an advisory board just be a complete game changer for a
Ah,
business
lots of
that
lots
you've been
lot,
part of?
lots of cases.
Mm.
I'll choose one that's perhaps a little different, and I often talk about the advisory boards that that really help growth. But I also had a client that we formed an advisory board, and this is a food manufacturing business. They were called uh, uh, Charlie's Cookies. Now they're Charlie's Fine Food, and this was a great business, servicing hotels, restaurants, cafes all over Australia. And we set up the advisory board just a little bit before COVID. So imagine, if you could imagine, and there they are supplying cookies and really great stuff that there's a really good market for, into hotels, cafes, and on the airlines too. They were servicing Qantas, etc. So overnight, what happened when COVID hit? Overnight, their market disappeared. Now we'd assembled a great growth focused advisory board because they were really looking to go to the kind of the next level. But this was a cataclysmic, threat to their business. And a family business, husband and wife team, great people, committed to their industry. But really, kind of what do you do in that scenario where all of a sudden overnight your customers disappear? And so our advisory board went from meeting on a quarterly basis to meeting every 2 weeks
Mm.
and exploring every possible scenario. We have a factory, we have people, we have staff. Where are the markets? Where are the opportunities? What can we do? And we really helped the two owners there, the two directors, reframe what they wanted to do, change their position, change their product range, and shift very quickly into retail. So a different market, and we did that over the space of about 2 months. So it's not an example of kind of growth, but it's one of those examples around how an advisory board who had the right skills, who had the mindset, to be able to help the directors navigate through what was a very
Absolutely.
cataclysmic time. Which, if they'd been on their own, when you're faced with that scenario of your kind of business potentially closing, it's pretty tough when that tunnel's there to be able to think broadly and think objectively about your business. But our advisory board had the right skills, the right people on board, committed to try and get them business through. Yeah, now they're doing a fantastic job. You'll find Charlie's Fine Food in Woolies and Coles and kind of all over. So yeah,
That
great. It's a great story in that sense.
that's such a great story.
Yeah.
And people when they're in that crisis situation, they don't necessarily think
Yes.
strategically. It's like, oh
Yeah.
my God, how do I survive? Whereas you don't
That's it.
necessarily just want to do that. It's broader than that, like you helped
Well,
with.
but I talk about objectivity as one of the key benefits because when you're running your own business like that, if you're an owner, founder, no matter what the size, you are emotionally engaged with your business. Your kind of status is wrapped up with the business, financial wealth is wrapped up in the business. It's pretty tough to be objective when you're kind of in that scenario. One of the key benefits in an advisory board is just providing that perspective, that objectivity that is unemotional, and it's hard sometimes, but it's great, and it's what
Yes.
CEOs need.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm really fascinated. So, what if the advisory board has said something that goes completely against your gut instinct or what you think is right? Has it ever happened to you? But, like, how would you approach that? Because I would
That's
feel like
a
that would be
yeah.
hard.
Yeah, that's a great insightful question because obviously when I talk about advisory boards, I talk about all the positive things about
Yeah.
advisory boards, and the reality is it's a model, and the model can
Mm.
work fantastically for the right CEO. The model can also be challenging, and you're right. There are going to be those times and scenarios where an advisory board is going to, given the circumstances of what they know about the business, the resources, the ambition, the capability of the organization, the capability of the leadership team, they're going to be saying, we really think you need to be going in this direction. And for the CEO who's, this is their passion, this is their livelihood, this is their vision, this is, as I said, their dent that they want to make in the universe, that might be counter to kind of what they what the advisors are saying. And so there's a couple of things there. One is it's great that you're getting that external advice and you're doing a reality check on your own hunches and your own gut. So it certainly would behoove you to, as a CEO, to say, hang on, let me listen, let me understand what's behind this advice, the research, the experience that makes the advisory board come up with this perspective. And how does that marry with my knowledge of my experience within the industry, etc.? And the bottom line is, and the advantage of an advisory board, you can get all that advice from the advisory board and you can still say thanks, but you know what? Actually, I'm not going to go east, I'm going to go west. So you get that opportunity to kind of make that decision. Now, and that certainly has happened, whether that's to do with time, the urgency of doing something, doing it now versus doing it in 12 months, whether it's to do with strategic direction, whether it's to do with people, etc. You will certainly get those scenarios. The key is, and it's not such a bad thing because it said there's a good tension there and value coming from the advisory board because they've got a different perspective.
Yes.
What you don't want from an advisory board is everybody to say to the CEO, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Because obviously then there's not much point in it. And the challenge though in your scenario, which is a great question. Now, if that happens after every meeting that you're having, then either the advisory board is wrong or the CEO is wrong. And it's a bit like if they kind of say yes, if everybody agrees all the time, there isn't much need for one. Equally, if everybody disagrees all the time, there isn't much need for one. But it's a great question, and it's going to happen, likely to happen.
Yeah,
And I think it's a positive because it just shows that tension of different perspectives, and then forces the CEO to really think about why they've got that perspective. And if they come out of that even more resolute about their ideas, great. Good for them. Time
Yeah.
will tell.
Time will tell. Absolutely. Which leads me to my next question. How do you get the right people for you? Does
Yeah,
it go back to your point that you need to be really clear on your North Star and understand the gaps? Is it
yeah.
that
So
sort
it's
of
really great. Another great question. How do you choose what needs to be? And so for me, it falls out of the strategy that you're thinking about. So let's assume you've got this North Star, this direction that you're trying to achieve, and hopefully you've worked through the strategy to get there. Inevitably, when you do a strategy like that, there's a gap. There's a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that gap can be in terms of size, market share, but it's also going to be in capability. That's just the reality, right? So, we need to build capability in our organization to get to a certain level. And the question then becomes, okay, for a CEO, for a leadership team, do we hire in that capability? I don't know. Let's say an organization wants to go international, but they've never done it before. Nobody in the organization's done it before. You can kind of go and say, oh, we'll go and hire an international sales manager, export manager, or something. If an organization realizes that it needs, high level digital marketing inside or digital transformation internally, it can look and say, okay, can we hire this resource in yet? Or should we actually test the market by building those skills onto our advisory board for people and surround ourselves with people who have deep expertise in that area that we need to achieve, and build and develop ultimately internally, and then can they enable us to absorb those skills over time, build the business until we get to a point where we can say, that capability, whether it's export or whether it's digital transformation, is something that we can now fully embrace internally, hire our own resources and people there. So the skill sets that are needed for an advisory board fall out of that strategy. Now, some of those are shorter term, like I've just mentioned, and some of them are longer term. So I talk about, you have to start with the chair, and the chair has to be somebody who has broad commercial and relevant market expertise, professional expertise, whether it's in your scale of business, whether it's in your type of industry, and has to be relevant for you. So kind of that's the model of how you choose,
Mm.
the skill sets that should be there. Your question was more about where do you find them, though, I think, wasn't it?
Oh
How
no,
would you?
how do
Yeah.
you, like
So that's
ascertain
the first
really
step
who
is
you
to,
need?
the first step is to kind of map out that and kind of say, wow. So what we need is, a person who has this skill set, and then you kind of go, how do you find those people? Yeah, you have to, every CEO knows the answer to this question. If I ask them this question, if I say, you know what it takes to grow your business, and someone in your industry that you go, wow, if only was sitting on my advisory board. She is the expert in this industry, in this space. She's global reputation. Wow, it'd be fantastic if Julie could help us. And we can go, and then we can look at it and go, okay, so Julie's the perfect result. Sure, we can always reach out to Julie and say, hey, would you try and help this SME build their business? And then you can kind of go, well, if it wasn't Julie, who would be the next person? And once you've done that stretch of who in the industry might be fantastic for you, most CEOs can pretty come up with, well, there's actually 3, 4, 5 people who they can identify. I'm talking about as the chair initially,
Yeah,
and say, well, if I had one of those as my chair, that would be awesome. And I've found, in my experience of doing this now, certainly advisory board for the last 20 years, it's always worked. There's
yeah,
always a connection between either the CEO or the CEO's connections or my connections, where we kind of go, here's somebody in your industry that's already got a reputation that is willing to engage. And so I think that's how you start. And then once you've got the chair, then you work with the chair. It's the chair's job then to say, okay, who else do we need? What's the other skill set we need sitting around the advisory board? So yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Love it. Love it. And another thing, and then we'll wrap up. I'll give you the floor to have the final say.
No,
But
no,
there, when the CEO that I was working with decided that she wanted to have an advisory board, and she found the right people, and they really helped her grow, or we did, I should say. She felt really vulnerable,
yes,
because everything's laid out, right? The
yes.
financial, everything, team, all of that. What do you say to people who are thinking, oh, I'd love to do it, but I just feel really scared?
Well, yeah, but that's the expression of, I talk about the commercial loneliness of a CEO,
Mm,
right? What most CEOs want to do, want to kind of keep talk about the good stuff, talk about the great stuff that's happening in their business, but the bad stuff, oh, the cash flow is not so great, or a couple of people
mm,
that perhaps aren't the greatest. You kind of keep those kind of quiet when you're sitting around with friends and colleagues talking about these sorts of things.
mm,
Yes, once you've got an advisory board, it all has to come out. You all have to lay it out there, and that's important so that the advisory board understands the complete context.
mm,
Because one of the ways in which it succeeds is, and equally one of the ways it can fail, is if there's a mismatch between the kind of ambition, resources, values of the CEO and the skill set and experience of the kind of advisory board. There has to be an understanding there of the context of the CEO and kind of what they're trying to achieve. So, for example, if you're, I don't know, if you're a $10 million business and you find a chair that's also the chair of $1 billion business, their perspective is likely to be a little bit different. You have to be able to stretch the CEO, but you can't stretch too far. The CEO has to have a mindset where they go, I have to lay it all out, and this is the safe and confidential environment, the one environment where I can kind of let it all out, and I can talk about my own fears, my own concerns about my own skill set, whether you're the right person to take this business forward, etc. This is the environment where you can talk about that, where you can't really have those conversations kind of with people within your own kind of organization. They don't necessarily want to hear about your kind of reflections. But yeah, so that's one of the kind of key points about an advisory board is you've got to have the CEO being willing to be vulnerable, and equally the advisors really understanding the resource, ambition, capability of the CEO and the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, I think I could speak to you forever. So, and I really encourage people to get the book. It's nice and short, and it's really interesting to read. I can't wait to finish it. Is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you would like our listeners to know?
I just think that the key message, I guess, Julie, is that I think this structure, and there are many sources of advice, right? Consultants, mentors, and governance boards, etc. And they're all great. They're all valuable. So for a CEO, if you haven't got advice, first step is get some kind of advice, get some external kind of result. But if you are in that point where you want to transition from the fighting position to the next step, then I think this is really a tool that you should explore, and it will enable you to kind of unleash your business, go through that step change, and basically kind of stand on the shoulders of people who've already kind of walked the path that you want to go. So explore it. It's not a complicated process to set up, but it does take commitment and investment. As we know, with risk comes reward. So with that investment, you equally want to expect the reward too. So
Yeah.
go explore it.
Yes, agree. Anthony, thank you so much for being part of Leading You today.
Thank you, Julie. It's been my pleasure to be here.